Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Ruby Rogues. I'm David Kimura, and today on our panel we have Darren Bromer.
Hello, everybody.
And Luke Stutters.
Hello.
And today we have a special guest, Masafumi Okura.
Hi, everyone.
So Masafumi, would you mind just giving us an introduction of who you are, what you're doing, and just some of the things that people know you for?
Sure. So I'm a freelance software engineer based in Japan, Tokyo. I've been doing Rails and Ruby stuff for over 8 years. And now I'm developing a JSON serializer library called Alba. I'm also a chief organizer of tech conference called Kaigi on Rails. I also organize local Ruby meetups, like a few. That's it.
I remember working my tail off to become a senior developer. I read every book I could get my hands on. I went to any conference I could and watched the videos about the things that I thought I needed to learn. And eventually, I got that senior developer job. And then I realized that the rest of my career looked just like where I was now. I mean, where was the rush I got from learning? What was I supposed to do to keep growing? And then I found it. I got the chance to mentor some developers. I started a podcast and helped many more developers. I did screencasts and helped even more developers. I kind of became a dev hero. And now I want to help you become one too. And if you're looking forward to something more than doing the same thing at a different job 3 years from now, then join the Dev Heroes Accelerator. I'll walk you through the process of building and growing a following and finding people that you can uniquely help as you build the next stage of your career. You can learn more at devheroesaccelerator.com.
Cool. And is the Kaigi on Rails different from the Ruby Kaigi?
Totally different. No overlaps of organizers or concepts. Yeah.
Cool. And how long have you been organizing the Kaigi on Rails?
Actually, it started last year. Yeah. So it's a new shiny conference.
Yeah. And that's one thing I love about the Rails community. A lot of people say that it's just kind of leveled off or it's just not growing anymore. But there's always great people, new people coming in and just starting something new. And, I really hope it takes off for you.
I'm going to go ahead and ask the silly question because I think that I'm the only one on the panel without the language background. So maybe could you say, is there a meaning behind the word Kaigi, or what do we take from that?
So Kaigi, the word Kaigi means meeting, but not exactly, but it's similar to meeting. But in this context, Kaigi means conference taking place in Japan or some sort of thing. So basically, before Ruby Kaigi, there is a Ruby Conf in the States, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they needed to come up with new name for another conference focusing on Ruby. And then they came up with the word Kaigi, and that was fit.
Makes sense.
Awesome.
Yeah, Ruby community. I love it.
And one thing that you mentioned in your introduction was a JSON serializer, Alba. Would you mind diving into that a bit? What it is, why you're creating it? Because we do have some JSON serializers already available to us in Rails. So what makes yours different, or what was your inspiration behind it?
So first of all, I liked the existing solutions like active model serializers or like JBuilder, but they don't spark joy. They don't spark joy. Komari-san stuff.
No, they do not spark any joy at all.
No, so I try to find something I'm satisfied with. And so, for example, Blueprinter. Do you know Blueprinter? No. So Blueprinter is a Ruby gem from a Procore team, and it was better than MS in some points, but the wording is kind of unique sort of thing. And I didn't think that I could introduce it to my team. So I kept looking for the best one, but I couldn't find it. So I started to think I can build my own one that's better than any alternatives.
Can we just dive into why would you not just call .to JSON? What's the point of this? Because I just go .to JSON, and it's not that simple. You need to require JSON first. It's not yet included automatically.
But why would you not just call .to.json on your objects?
Because it's dangerous. It's dangerous because...
No, it's fine. What are you talking about? It's perfectly safe.
For example, it could leak password field, password digest, or password encrypted or whatever, but it could leak like the information which we don't want to expose. We cannot control what should be exposed or not. Or it could be possible, but it's hard. But in contrast with serializers, we have a allow list about what should be exposed.
Right. So it's a kind of, it doesn't get in unless you explicitly say this is serializable.
Right.
So you're saying it's dangerous in the sense that to.json is not aware, it has no knowledge of the semantic meaning of the object. It's just going to simply dump all of the contents. So you might get a leaked password, leaked credentials, something like that. So, and certainly that can happen. Is it still relying on good intentions of developers then to use that and to annotate what fields are sensitive? Or how does it go about adding that guardrail, adding that protection?
So you asked how to protect?
Yeah, so if one of the main benefits is to add a guardrail so that we don't just dump sensitive data into a log file or somewhere where we don't want that to happen, what are some of the main protections that your library provides? How does it help stop the problem of a developer just writing to JSON and sensitive data gets leaked? How would I go about using it?
So not about my library, but about the nature of JSON serializer libraries explicitly tells the serializer what are the attributes. So for example, there's no way to tell Alba to expose all attributes because there's no definition of all attributes. So when there are like 20 attributes on the class, then you have to explicitly tell Alba to expose 20 attributes.
Okay, so it's
20 symbols.
Right. It's an opt-in. I have to think through each attribute that I want to be included in the JSON, and in that process, decide whether it's appropriate or not.
So if it's not appropriate, then we can just not include the attribute.
Right.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, I didn't know if it used anything from the model classes or any other metadata that might be available to help with that process.
No, because it doesn't depend on active record, for example. Actually, it doesn't depend on any external libraries. So there's no mechanism to fetch metadata from the object.
But the whole opt-in, that's really not a bad practice, especially when you're talking about an API. Because how often would someone come in and add a new attribute to this model that you're creating? So if we are talking about a simple user model that has an email, username, password, whatever else kind of attributes, and now you want to grant some kind of API token to that user so that they can then make calls to your application. So you just generate a API key for every user in your table, and then they can just go to their account, get the key, and then start using it. Well, if you forgot that you were just doing a JSON serializer on your user table, but you had explicitly excluded the password column and perhaps the email, well, now you just leak the API keys to everybody if you're not doing an opt-in. So I think having a explicit opt-in to where later, as you're developing, you're like, hey, why don't we have access to our API key that we added in to this JSON endpoint? Well, now we know why, because we didn't explicitly opt in to include that. So I see this as a much safer way than just by default giving everybody everything and excluding what you just don't want.
Yeah, I think you end up with the classic trade-off of you want to make it easy to do the right thing. And this is a little bit of a trade-off between development productivity or efficiency versus being able to have the correctness and having the security controls you want. Because it's certainly easier to do right to JSON. If you're going to opt in and explicitly add each attribute of objects in your serializer, you're going to do the right thing, but the trade-off is I've taken more time to do that in each of the use cases where that comes up. So I think this is sort of that's the trade-off that I think we're talking about here.
I'm gonna rain on this and say Alba is a great name it's a good name. I like the name, but I don't like the serializer. And that's because it uses JSON, which is obviously JavaScript based and therefore bad. What's wrong with Marshall.dump? I know Darren was alluding to that earlier. Surely Marshall.dump is a much better way. It's a Ruby way of storing objects. Why would we not use Marshall.dump instead of the JSON format?
I'll consider adding new backend of Marshall.
In all seriousness, my introduction to Ruby was not in the context of web applications. It was in the context of retail, in-store retail applications and shops. And we had Ruby objects that were using Marshall.dump into a database and being restored. And I remember distinctly, it would have been kind of late 2010 maybe later than that, we started moving to this newfangled JSON format. And it's amazing how 10 years on, everything is using JSON to the extent that, is it Postgres? Does MySQL have it too, where if you serialize an object to JSON, you can not only put it in the database, but you can also tell the database that this is a JSON object, and you can do optimized queries based on the contents of that.
MySQL does have a JSON data type. I think it came out in MySQL 5.6 or 5.7. And then Postgres has had it for quite a long time. And prior to that, they had HStore, I believe. But I mean, Luke, would you prefer XML for everything?
Yes. Because of types. Types make everything better, don't they? Which is actually a question I wanted to ask Masafumi. Have you looked at the new type support in Ruby and in the context of serializing types?
Actually, I tried to type Alba a few months ago using TypeProf gem and RBS gem. And the result was, it was possible, but at that time, it was a few months ago, it was not, enjoyable thing to do. And in terms of JSON, it supports only 6 types: string, integer, booleans, array, object, and null. So it's so simple that the language type system is not related. But I believe Ruby's type system is getting better in the future, and it supports in some ways, it supports Alba or other gems as well.
So it's funny you said XML, Dave, because actually I am just started working on a project which is XML based, and it has a kind of aerospace angle to it. And one of the reasons why they're using XML and not JSON, I mustn't say that because we're applying for funding. Firstly, there's nothing wrong with XML. What a great format, because the types are often a requirement for stuff like air traffic control data. So it must be typed. You're not allowed to have an untyped system because of it's being used in a decision-making process. But I much prefer JSON. JSON's a lot better, isn't it? If you could, you'd JSON it.
I know. I remember a few years ago, I was trying to work with a XML-based API, talking over a SOAP interface, and
not SOAP. No,
I did not enjoy it.
This has become the retro Ruby episode now, hasn't it?
That definitely does not spark joy doing that. But Luke, it sounds like maybe you would be a fan of. We should start an RSON. I did just happen to look, and it looks like Rust has already taken the Rust object notation acronym, but maybe we can come up with an RSON prime Ruby version and maybe take the best of JSON and XML. How about that?
I struggle to think what Ruby has in terms of types because you can just define your own, can't you? You just kind of make your own class. This is what I do when I get in trouble in Ruby is you just use an iser and do your type checking that way. So I think if in order to do it the Ruby way, you'd have to have an object notation format that can support meta programming within the object notation itself. I think this is the most Ruby way to do it, is so that the object notation itself can spring classes. But then of course you've got the classic, Marshall, which you can marshal classes, correct? And didn't they have this enormous security problem when was it kind of 187 when it turned out that you could kind of execute whatever you wanted if you did a marshal.load? I can't remember the details, but this is another reason why we had to move to JSON from the marshal.dump, is because it was, even though it was a closed system, it was quite a high profile thing at the time. I think Ruby 1.9, does that ring a bell?
I don't remember the Marshall security issue. Not saying it wasn't there, but it's strange. So, Masafumi, question around Alba. Is there a reason why, if someone is creating a Ruby on Rails application, why should they consider using Alba over the included JBuilder?
So JBuilder is a view layer, and the way it abstracts vision composition is to use partials. But using partials in JBuilder is slow. It's really slow that there are some articles about how to speed up JSON partial rendering in JBuilder. And one solution is to use cache. But as you know, cache is hard to fully control. And basically, if we don't need to use cache, we're happy, right? So in order to use JBuilder with the speed we're happy with, we need to use cache. It's not a thing. The second thing is JBuilder's DSL is, in my opinion, hard to remember. I'm always confused, like what's extract or what's like when I call array and the method, like what happens or something. And I don't think it's intuitive. In contrast, not only Alba, but serializer style is much more readable, but like just a few lines of attributes declaration, like attributes name, attributes ID, attributes full name, do first name plus last name, and that's it. Like, so there are mainly two benefits. One is speed. JBuilder is typically slow, but Alba is not only faster than JBuilder, but also faster than other similar alternatives. The second reason is the easy to understand. I don't know how to say it in English. Understandability.
Yeah.
So in my opinion, JBuilder is hard to understand, while serializer style is much easier to read.
Cool. And I noticed in the documentation, you have a different backend configuration that you can use. So you can use the default, which is just the default or JSON, which means that you don't need any external dependencies. Or you could add in something else like OJ, which then you are adding in an additional dependency. But what is going to be the main difference in using a different kind of backend with Alba?
The difference? So
why would someone want to introduce another dependency like OJ to be used along with Alba?
So OJ is optimized JSON, and the dumping speed is faster than the default bundled JSON library. And it also has features called optimized Rails, which literally optimize JSON for Rails. So some people are already using OJ for their JSON solutions in Rails. And in Alba, I don't want Alba to be dependent on external gems, but if it's optional, it's totally fine for me. So I made it optional dependency, OJ. And so I'm happy with no dependencies. And people already using OJ are also happy because they still use OJ while they start to use Alba. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's cool because I think you kind of hit something that had been frustrating me about JBuilder that I never really put my finger on it, and it's the partials. Their DSL is strange, and I just always go to the gem documentation whenever I need to really work in there until I'm caught back up to speed again on JBuilder. But the partials always seem to be trying to be too Railsy, if that makes sense, where they try to make it seem too much like Rails instead of trying to go for speed over the Rails way of doing something. And I think that's kind of a mistake because especially when you're talking about a JSON API, that's not really a user interface. So you want that thing to be really fast. And if you're introducing something like partials, then it very well could slow it down, especially if you're rendering a whole bunch of them.
I got a confession to make. I don't use JBuilder. I just make my own hash and call .to JSON on it. I don't, if I need to serialize a complex object, I just tend to write my own because it's quicker for the stuff I do. But I can see that maybe some people do need JBuilder if they've got. I noticed that there's a test for circular dependencies. If you've got a more complex nested data structure that you want to serialize, you might go to something like Alba or JBuilder. Yes. What for you? What's the pain point? When do you draw the line and say, okay, I'm not going to just make my own hash and JSONify it? When do you start thinking, I need a serialization system for this problem?
If there are more than two eaches, I think I consider moving to more declarative ways. Like if it's flat JSON, then it's absolutely fine to just render JSON by crafting hash manually. But and if statement. So nesting loops and repeated if statement makes me feel, I need to find another way.
I'll admit to 8 each statements. I'll admit to having written a serializer that uses 8. Yeah. Before I start thinking there's something wrong. Yeah, 2. That's a low bar. That's what I'll say. Yeah, I will then ask as a follow-up question. What's wrong with having loads of each statements? Why not just make whatever JSON you feel like? Is there an advantage to testing using this serialization framework?
So you might need JB. You know JB, not JBuilder, but JB.
James Bond?
No, JB is a alternative to JBuilder. So basically, it lets us write hash in JBuilder template. That's it.
Right.
So it's very straightforward. So when you want to write JSON in your view template, then this might help you. And look, what was your original question? I forgot.
It was just to do with if you want to do something quick, you just make a hash and put it out as JSON. But as soon as you start to get a more complicated structure, then this will help you manage complexity. I was just seeing if there are any other benefits like easier testing or things like that.
So for example, when we talked about types, Alba supports typing already. So for example, when I declare like 3 attributes, let's say ID, name, and email, and I can declare ID should be integer, name should be string, and email is also string. So when we manually craft JSON by hand, it's not possible to ensure that. No, it's possible. I mean, when we call to_i or to_s or capital integer method over the attribute, it's possible, but it's not scattered. It's messy. Yeah. So yeah, the performance is definitely the benefit of using Alba, but actually when we create JSON API, the bottleneck tends to be SQL part and not API part. So of course, when Alba performs really fast, it's a good thing. But yeah, expressiveness is the benefit Alba provides over other solutions.
Thank you.
Hey, folks, if you love this podcast and would like to support the show, or if you wish you could listen without the sponsorship messages, then you're in luck. We're setting up new premium podcast feeds where you can get all of the episodes released after Christmas 2020 without the ads. Signing up will help us pay for editing and production, and you can go sign up at devchat.tv/premium.
One issue I have with JSON APIs just in general is having to deal with pagination. If you make a JSON API that also does pagination, it's possible and you can do it. It's very annoying. I don't know if you guys have had that experience.
I don't know what you mean.
Because a lot of times if you have a separate front end from a back end, you can't just return the records. They want to know what page is it, and then how many total records there are, and then what iteration of records are you on, like 26 to 50, and that kind of stuff.
I think you're going to have that, though, with any data format, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, I don't know. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, but, if you just stick with plain old Rails, you're not having to do JSON or anything, then the Kaminari or will paginate gem and you're golden, or even the Pagi gem, and you're pretty much golden. You don't have to worry about all that. But if you are doing a separate back end from a front end, then you do have to worry about, okay, we need to add in all these extra attributes that if we had just kept it as a single monolith, I never would have had to worry about. So really, I guess this isn't a bash on JSON APIs as much as it is JavaScript frameworks.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Pagination is tricky part. I'd love to support pagination in Alba, but there are three major libraries, as Bev mentioned. Will paginate, the old one, is pretty old, like Rails 3.0 era. And Kaminari is new one, and the Pagi is the latest one. And the behavior of three gems are like different. And it basically, in Pagi, for example, in Pagi, it returns Pagi method. Pagi helper method returns Pagi object, and this object contains pagination information. Currently, I have not found a good way to integrate Pagi information into Alba internals. It's totally external to Alba, so we need to somehow integrate it. But I once thought, like, oh, there are only three libraries, so I can provide three ways to integrate pagination gems. But now I don't think it's the right way to go down.
And so, quick question, just overviewing about Alba. So how long have you been working on it? And is it something that you foresee yourself continuing to do? Because that's one concern that I have whenever I consider the adoption of a gem. Is it well tested? Is it currently being worked on or maintained? Does the main author still have interest in it?
The first commit, according to GitHub, the first commit is January 21, 2020. It's initial commit. So 17 months ago. Anyway, the head of last year. And I'm fully interested in continuing developing Alba. Actually, right before this show started, I added one commit to Alba, and that's add a new badge to README. So actually, it's a therapy for me. It might sound weird, but writing code, developing Alba is now a therapy. When I'm confused, or when I'm in chaos, or when I'm depressed, I code and I feel okay. And I write more code and I feel better. So
yeah,
and
I've been trying to teach my wife Ruby, just to help with her depression, but she won't learn it.
I think reading code has the opposite effect on me.
I think it's a really good call out that you made, Masafumi, in that coding is a great way to express yourself, a little bit of escapism, and it is almost like therapy. I'm curious. I'm always interested to ask engineers this when they take on a big project. So you mentioned you started around 17 months or so ago. So you identified these pain points and the problems that you wanted to solve, make it easier or more secure for developers, like you mentioned. So as you've gone through this process, what's something that you've learned, or that maybe you didn't think about as much at the beginning, maybe something that you were surprised by? But what's your big takeaway from you? You spent a decent amount of time working on this, 17 months. So what's something that you learned out of this exercise or out of this project?
I learned a lot about myself. So when the energy inside me is empty or almost empty, I could write code, but it's not something I find best. When I'm not healthy enough, I write code, but the result is not something I'm satisfied with. So writing code is really something I need to focus. I need to do at my best. Well, so writing okay code is possible when I'm not fully focused. But writing best code takes me so much effort and concentration. So I need to take rest. So when you see my commit history, for some month there's almost no commit. I recall at that time I felt not okay. I was depressed or something like that. And the code history is honest. When I feel better, I write lots of code. I commit a lot. Like sometimes I make 6 or 7 commits in a day, and I'm not best. Commits are like one commit a day or 2 commits per week or something. So code is barometer.
That's an interesting thought, that someone's Git history or their commits, and when you look at that, how that maps or translates to what's going on in their life or just their happiness, how much joy, how much sparking of joy is going on. Now, those are really interesting points. I definitely agree with the therapy, and I think in terms of being satisfied with code, I mean, we're engineers. Like, we always feel like there are things that we can do to improve or things we want to add. I think sometimes we let perfect be the enemy of the good. But
speak for yourself, Darren. I'm all about lowering those barriers to entry, or standards, as other people call them.
And clearly, without a doubt, the last year has been challenging. So I think coding, from studies that I have seen, some of the productivity has certainly gone up. A lot of engineers are working remotely now, so that adds to that. But we've also been a little more isolated, and now we're trying to figure out this new hybrid model. Fortunately, though, I think software development has always, with open source and with tools like GitHub, the tools to do asynchronous kind of distributed development have always been there. So I think we've been able to transition more easily than some other industries or lines of business. But yeah, no, just kind of going back to what you were talking about, tying into just the psychological aspects of it and looking at that's probably a topic for another show, but certainly interesting one.
I learned another thing I forgot to mention, that I noticed that I could write something that's meaningful out of work. So in the context of work, we believe everything we do is meaningful, but outside of work, we typically think what we do is just for us, just for recreation, just for killing time. But I found creating a library and let it used by someone I don't know is a fantastic experience. Or I could build something meaningful in my spare time, and that was also a therapical moment.
Well, when you're doing your work, it's out of need that you're building these things. You need to get your tasks done. You need to complete the job, and so you're building those components, writing that software out of necessity. Necessity is the mother of all invention, I guess they say. When you're doing it on your spare time, and when you're doing it for your own personal projects, you're not necessarily solving. You may be solving a problem at hand. You may just be creating something that you find interesting. So it's almost the difference between like top-down philosophy or bottom-up. You don't necessarily know what problem you're solving, but it's something that you find interesting. And oftentimes, like you said, many other people do find it extremely useful. And I think that's why open source is, so many people get into it, because it is a great feeling.
Yeah, open source feels good. Honestly, I'd like to recommend like my friends to build something small in an open source manner and let people find it. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I want to switch topics real quick, before we run out of time. Is there anything that you want to say about Kaigi on Rails?
So Kaigi on Rails is my another thing I do in my spare time, and I love it. So unfortunately, it started as an online conference last year, and it's also online this year.
This is a great name. I love the name of the conference, the Stay at Home Edition. This is a really great name because there's so many possibilities. Because you can now make this year the kind of keep staying at home edition, and then finally, when Japan's more open, you can have the don't stay at home edition. So this is a name that keeps on giving. It's a very good name.
I didn't come up with that idea, but yeah, in the future, maybe next year, hopefully.
You can even have
not stay at home.
Well, you could just say stay at home Aaron Patterson edition. You could just make one person stay at home.
But stay at home edition is the name of the last year's one. This year, actually I wanted to add new name to each year. So for example, Kaigi on Rails Sofa edition or Kaigi on Rails blah 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 edition, whatever. But other team members were against me that it's hard to remember. So this year, it's just Kaigi on Rails 2021. Yeah. But anyway, we will have one. It's a domestic conference this year, but I'm planning to make it international next year, 2022. So I hope that we can invite lots of people from overseas to Japan and let them enjoy sushi, sake, those kind of fantastic thing. And this year, we will invite someone from core team. We were doing so, and so although the conference is for Japanese developers, people outside Japan will enjoy a keynote and some tech talks from the event.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yes.
I mean, your last one, you definitely got some pretty big names in there, which is really cool. Just a few that I recognize, Kyoji and Kira Matsuda and Aaron Patterson. So I definitely wish you luck in this year's conference.
Thank you.
Are you going to have a Ruby Olympics? Because, of course, it is Olympics year in Japan, correct?
Correct. And if we do Ruby Olympics, if we open it, what's the thing to do? I mean,
Kura Sushi Eating Contest, first event.
What is it? Sushi eating event?
The 100 yen sushi restaurant. Whoever has the most plates wins.
Yeah. We have Kaiken sushi in Japan, where just like one coin, like $1 sushi comes to us. We order it and they just come on the belt conveyor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is an idea I've been thinking about for a while. I've been trying to make a wheel of Ruby, like a wheel of fortune, for the podcast, so we can kind of spin it virtually, and it will land on various aspects of the Ruby language. And then you get a point if you can answer the question. But unfortunately, my front-end development skills are lacking, so it may end up being made of wood instead of CSS. Watch this space. But when in the UK, we used to have meetups, then we had a great competition where we had to make a hangman program. So the idea was that you have a very simple game that's competitive, and you can write a Ruby program to play the other Ruby program. Yes. So whoever can kind of write the best competitive Ruby program within kind of 1 hour, 2 hours, then they win. And of course, we're all in the pub, we're in the bar, we're drinking beer while we're doing it. So that's the last competitive Ruby event I went to. But it's difficult to do in these difficult times, but it might be fun.
Seriously, though, I want to make Kaigi on Rails a festival for Rubyist. And so we're thinking of having some sort of workshops or those kind of interactive communications, so that Kaigi on Rails is not something we just sit and watch and done.
That's really cool. Was there anything else that we want to discuss or talk about, or should we move on into picks?
We should probably mention that the CFP for Ruby Kaigi is open, correct?
Correct. Actually, I've already submitted it.
Awesome. And when does that end? When is the
end of June.
deadline? Okay. So people still have some time to submit a talk if they want. And is it Japanese required or English for the talks?
As usual. So no Japanese required.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great. So that definitely opens up a lot of doors to others. So cool. All right, Masafumi, if people want to reach out to you or kind of follow you online, where should they go?
I can be found on Twitter, twitter.com/Okura Masafumi, my full name, OKURAMASAFUMI. I also have some other social accounts, but not active. Maybe the most active one is GitHub, github.com/Okura Masafumi, the same.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and dive into some picks.
Hey, folks, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been working a lot on figuring out how to help people become the most valuable developers on their teams or becoming the top 5% of developers in the field. If you're looking to level up, figure out how to contribute more, get the career you want, get the career that you want that will support the lifestyle you want, then you should check out the Most Valuable Dev Summit. I've invited some of my friends across the community, people that you've heard of, people that have worked on systems that you use on a daily basis, people who have invented new ways of doing things over the years in programming, and I've asked them one question, and that question is, how do you become a top 5% developer? How do you become 1 in 20 of the best developers out there? And so we're going to go ahead and have that conversation with them in interviews on the Most Valuable Dev Summit, and you can find that at summit.mostvaluable.dev.
Luke, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'm going to pick myself. Not literally myself. I'm going to pick my gem because I wrote a gem. This is the first public software release I've made since 1998. This is the first code I put online in the internet era. And it's also my first gem, coincidentally, and even has a badly written test in it and some RDoc. I found it difficult to do. I did find it difficult to write my first gem, partly because I had to skip between guides because I'd never done kind of RDoc stuff before. So I was kind of juggling various things. But it's online. It's a gem that uses a card reader, a wireless card reader, an RFID card reader. So it's kind of a hardware support gem. And you have a little wireless key tag that you could use for opening doors or turning off and on equipment, a bit like a wireless barcode. If you wanted to use this kind of hardware before, and it's very affordable, it's like kind of $3 PCB, this thing. If you wanted to use it before, you would have had to kind of use a Python library, which of course does work, but you have to, it's not ideal. I'd much rather do the whole thing in Ruby. So there we go. That's my gem. It's called RDM6300. That's the name of the hardware device. And hopefully I will have more hardware related gems soon.
Awesome. And Darren, do you have any picks?
Yes. So my pick for this week, it's based on, I'm a big fan of the functional programming paradigm where it makes sense. And so when you're talking about Rails controller actions or ones that logically kind of fit into the service pattern are, I think, a great way to design applications and reuse services. So there's a gem called Light Service, and it's, as the name implies, is a very light framework that gives you a nice pattern to use to develop these. It has some simple orchestration that you can combine existing services into larger transactions, and it's got very, very elegant error handling. And that is my pick for the week. I recommend it and suggest it if you've got any non-trivial amounts of application logic in your Rails apps. Check that out.
Awesome. And I'll jump in with the pick. I'm going to pick a non-programmer thing, but a techie thing, and it's the Apple AirTags. So we have invested in the Apple ecosystem, and we did just get the Apple TV, the newest edition with the new Siri remote. And apparently the remote is a millimeter thicker now, which is Apple's reasoning why they did not build in the AirTag support into the remote, which my kids have already lost it twice, once in the couch, which they thought, oh, couches, with this thing being 1 more millimeter thick, it won't get lost in your couches off. No, couches are not designed down to the millimeter. That's just a fact. And so I just basically hot glued an AirTag to the back of our Siri remote, and it's already saved me a few times because now it's definitely a lot more than just 1 millimeter thicker, and it won't fall into the couches. And it ends up under our couch in one of the kids' bedrooms outside for some reason. So AirTag hot glued to a Siri remote is pretty much my pick here.
How long do you think it would take before we see AirTags attached to gas station bathroom keys?
Oh dear. No comment on that one. But they have already made dog collars with AirTags, even though Apple really says this is not for tracking pets or humans. It is for tracking small devices. So, but whatever. It tracked my Siri remote really well. Masafumi, do you have any picks?
Yes, I have a couple picks. The first one is a service called ESA. So ESA is a basically markdown document sharing service for teams. But the superior feature is that it has our real-time collaboration editor for Markdown. So like Google Docs, but for Markdown. It really helps us when we run Kaigi on Rails. We write and share minutes in real time. And my second pick is nruby. Luke mentioned in the show, nruby. You can find nruby. It's not Ruby, but nruby. So M is embedded. Embedded Ruby is a Ruby implementation from Matt's himself, but it's slightly different than the Ruby's original implementation called CRuby or MRI. For example, it doesn't have public method and private method. All methods are public. So private call is just dummy. That's pretty interesting. And I translated my gem, some of my gems into nruby gems. And that's pretty fun. And I also...
Is there a separate gem system for mruby gems?
Yes, M gem or mrb gem. I don't know which name is the correct one. But yes, so we do have gem system.
Matt has his own secret supply of gems that I didn't know about.
Yeah, and so as a practice, I created a small factory bot for nruby, and that's a good practice exercise, brain exercise. So those are my picks.
Awesome.
Just like to say before we wrap up, Dave, that it's 4 a.m. in Tokyo. It's 4 a.m. So Masafumi has come on to do the Ruby Rogues podcast at 3 a.m. Japan time. That is dedication. As someone who has worked with a Japanese company for a few years, I feel your pain when it comes to time zones. And thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Right.
It's a lot of fun.
Go get some rest. All right. Well, that's a wrap, everyone. And I really appreciate you coming on and talking with us, especially so late your time. That was very kind of you. And I really enjoyed the conversation. All right.
Thank you.
Well,
bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.